Hello and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy drifting into dark, chilling tales whispered straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. A long time ago, someone asked me a strange question. It was my last year of high school. I was drunk out of my mind and crashing at a friend's place. We were coming down from an after party, and half of us didn't want to go home. 2 guys were passed out on the floor. One was nodding on and off, and a lazy boy in the corner, still holding a 40 like he planned to drink it in his sleep. I was stretched out on the couch next to a curly-haired girl, talking about nothing at all. The way drunk people do when the night is winding down, but nobody wants to admit it's over. Out of nowhere, she asked, "You know how to spot a kind of thing?" I blinked at her. "What kind of thing?" No, she said, lazily shaking her head like I'd missed the obvious. "Not a kind of thing. A kind of thing. You're not making any sense." She poked me in the chest and let her head fall onto my shoulder. Her voice went soft and sleepy, but she kept talking like she had to get the words out before she passed out. "It's a game," she said. "It teaches you to think about stuff." "All right. What is it?" "You sure you want to know?" I laughed. I mean, now I have to. I was barely paying attention. My hands smelled like cheese snacks and rubber. We'd been playing ping pong, and the paddles were cheap, that plastic kind that makes your hands stink afterward. I remember that detail because it's one of the last normal details in the whole story. "Okay," she said. "Think of a place you spend a lot of time in, like several times a week, but not all the time. Not like your bedroom." "I don't spend all my time in my bedroom." "Come on," she said, and poked me again. "You got a place in mind?" I thought of this narrow alleyway between my family's house and our neighbors. It was fenced off, too tight for a car to fit through. I cut through it almost every day on my way to school. It wasn't special, just a shortcut that smelled like wet concrete and old leaves. "All right," I said. "I got one." "Now," she continued, "think of something in that place, something you know is there, but you don't own it. Something you've seen, but you don't have any pictures of. Give me a sec." I pictured the thing immediately. A little teddy bear keychain someone had looped around one of the fence posts. Nothing fancy. Plastic. A heart in the middle of its chest and that neutral teddy bear smile that looks cheerful only because the mold was made that way. It was a small, harmless quirk on an otherwise depressing strip of concrete. "Okay," I said. "I got a thing." "You know what colors it is?" she asked. I thought I did. I knew there was red. I was sure of that. And maybe yellow. But when I tried to lock it down in my mind, I couldn't be exact. Maybe the nose was black. Maybe the ears were a different shade. The memory slid around like it didn't want to stay put. "Kinda," I said. Her eyes opened a little wider, like that was the right answer. She poked me one more time and muttered, almost pleased, "That's a kind of thing. They're pretty cool." She sat up and stretched, kicking over an empty can. The guy with the 40 finally gave up completely and curled into a ball. The room smelled like stale beer and sweat and cheap cologne. They exist on the edge of things, she said. It could be blue. It could be yellow. It could change into red. There's no way to really know. It only exists in your memory. But it's red, I argued, because part of me needed this to stay normal. How can you know for sure? She asked. Like, for sure, for sure. I can check it. What if it wasn't red yesterday? She said, still half asleep. Do you know for sure what it was yesterday? I scoffed. Things don't change color. Kinda. Things do. You're making this sound like a ghost story. Who says it isn't? She murmured. We drifted into that wine-soaked, late-night philosophy nonsense that feels deep until morning. Somehow we ended up making out on the patio. We stayed up until dawn, talking in circles and pretending we were profound. When the sun rose and a car came to pick her up, I stumbled home. On the way, I cut through that alley, and the teddy bear keychain was there, hanging from the same fence post. Except it wasn't red. It wasn't yellow. It was blue. A rich, obvious blue, like my mom's novelty sunflower decorations. There were a couple of red spots on the paws, but the main body was blue. I stood there staring at it, feeling that weird hollow moment when your brain tries to reconcile two conflicting truths and fails. I'd been certain it was red. Maybe I had only focused on the red details. Maybe I'd invented the rest. Maybe the girl was right. I pulled the keychain off the post and put it in my pocket. And then, this is important, I instantly forgot about it. Not like I chose to forget. Not like it slipped my mind because I was hungover. It was more like my attention refused to hold on to it. Like the thought of it slid off me. I didn't see that keychain again for a long time, and I didn't think much about it. But I guess that's the nature of kinda things. Over the next few years, I saw it in passing. The way you see an old object in your own life and barely register it. When I moved into my college dorm, it was sitting on my windowsill. I think my mom put it there while she helped me unpack. At some point, I knocked it off and it rolled under a nightstand, and I didn't find it until years later when I moved out. From there, it ended up in a box of knickknacks. That box ended up on a shelf in my apartment. The keychain's journey wasn't dramatic. It didn't do anything. It just stayed near me, quietly existing in the background, drifting from place to place the way old objects do. It's strange how long things stay in your orbit without you realizing it until you're old enough to look back and measure time properly. I got my bachelor's degree, then my master's. Then I started working on a doctorate. In the middle of all that, I had to teach. My focus was information science with a lean toward digital architecture and preservation. But I liked giving students something that stuck, something weird enough that it would keep echoing in their heads after class. That's when I remembered kinda things. I decided I was going to bring the teddy bear keychain to class as a prop, a simple, harmless anchor for a lesson about memory, context, and how fragile facts can get when you don't preserve them carefully. But when I went looking for it, I couldn't find it. I taught the kinda thing story anyway. I asked my students to think of their own. It was framed as a way to talk about preservation and how information changes when it's unrecorded, how context gets lost. But with first-year students, it turned into a party game. They went out and started pointing at random objects like they were spotting rare birds. It was kind of fun, honestly. Everyone had something. A cracked coffee cup abandoned on a window ledge in the library. An old bike wheel chained near the football field. A baseball cap on a top shelf in a lounge nobody could reach. Little meaningless objects that became meaningful only because someone noticed them and then couldn't remember them perfectly. Every class I taught heard that story. I skipped the part about making out on a patio and smelling like snack dust. They didn't need those details. Not everyone remembered my name, but they remembered that first question on the first day. You know how to spot a kind of thing? By the time I was 27, I finished my doctorate. I had a paid position, but I want something more permanent. Not tenure right away, I wasn't naive, but something with room to do experimental work. Maybe field work. Something bigger than repeating the same lectures in the same building in the same town. I applied out of state. Not Ivy League, but respectable. I figured it was time to stretch my wings. I'd spent my entire life in one city, one rhythm. I wanted to see if my mind felt different somewhere else. One of my proposals got accepted, and my time teaching that class was coming to an end. One more semester, and I was done. It was bittersweet. I'd gotten close with my colleagues. They were the fun kind of nerds, the kind who hosted board game nights in the lounge and kept water and cleaned out vodka bottles so students could take photos and post, "This is my professor, LOL." I knew it was time to move on, but I still hated goodbyes. My colleagues planned a going-away party anyway, a proper one. The last day of the class was a Friday. They turned it into an event. Colleagues attended. Students came. People gave little speeches. Some students shared quick stories about lectures they remembered. There were a lot of kind words. I'm not ashamed to admit I got teary. Endings do that. They take every stupid detail and suddenly make it precious. At the end, they unveiled a gift for me, something to take to my next office. It was covered with a big white cloth like a magician's reveal. They yanked the cloth away with flair, and everyone clapped. It was a box, a big one. At first it looked like a junk drawer dumped onto a table. A rock with googly eyes, an old horseshoe, a tacky bronze leprechaun, things like that. But then I saw the label printed on the side in big letters. Kinda things. "We decided to get them for you," one colleague said, leaning on my arm. "We know how much you love him. So we all went out and got our kinda things. We figured you'd enjoy them." I've never been so proud to receive a box of junk. The next few weeks were a blur of moving logistics. Boxes, leases, furniture, those little plastic caps you put on chair legs so they don't scrape the floor. Washing a tablecloth so the place feels lived in. Turning an empty apartment into a home in slow, awkward steps. All the while, the box sat on top of my closet, still proudly labeled, "Kinda Things." My new apartment had 3 rooms, a bathroom, and a kitchen. I hadn't planned on living that large, but it was too cheap to pass up. One room became my bedroom. One became a living room. The third room, I didn't know what to do with it, so I decided it would eventually be a guest room. For now, it became storage. A place for boxes of memories that didn't quite matter, but that I couldn't throw away. Not just the kind of things, but old baseball cards, participation trophies, signed band shirts, all the relics of someone who kept growing up without ever fully letting go. I think most people have a space like that, even if it's just a corner of a closet. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. I was busy. New town, new job, new routines. I was learning which restaurants made tofu that didn't taste like damp cardboard. I didn't have time to be sentimental. On my first day teaching at the new place, I brought the box of kinda things as a prop. I barely looked at it. I was too focused on keeping my notes straight and making a good impression. There were a couple new colleagues sitting in, and I couldn't afford to seem shaky. I greeted people, introduced myself, and ended up with about 40 students, plus a few extra bodies in the back, who weren't enrolled but wanted to see the new hire. I put the box at the front of the room. No photos, I told them, raising a finger like it was a secret. No pictures and no ownership. You can keep them, but they're never really yours. That got a few laughs. I led them into the usual discussion, asking them to name kinda things in their own lives while I pivoted into a metaphor about preservation and context and how information decays when it's not maintained. The setup worked. It always worked. But something about that particular class didn't sit right with me. Not just first-day nerves. Something about the crowd. Every time I looked up, my eyes snagged on something as if there had been movement, like the reflex you get when something shifts in your peripheral vision. Except nothing was shifting. I kept feeling watched, without knowing by whom. After class, I went home exhausted and socially drained. I set the box in the hallway, grabbed a beer, and wandered into the third room, the one that was still half storage, half guest room in my head. Mint green walls, barely any furniture, too much echo. I set my beer down and lifted the box onto the closet shelf. As I did, something tumbled out and bounced onto the floor with a small rattle. My teddy bear keychain. I stared at it, dumbfounded. It couldn't have been in that box. I would have seen it. Unless I put it there during the move and forgot. Unless my mom had slipped it in. Unless I'd done it myself without noticing. I picked it up and rolled it between my fingers, studying it like it was evidence. It wasn't like I remembered. It wasn't all blue the way I'd decided it was after that morning in the alley. It was mostly gray now, with blue and red details. The eyes looked like lemons. The heart on its chest looked smaller than I remembered. It made my skin crawl in a quiet way. I decided to take the box down and check what else was in there. If I had accidentally mixed my old keychain in with my new kinda things box, maybe other things were in there too. I sat on the floor and opened the box. For a moment, my mind simply refused to work. I was looking at objects I had never seen before. An old-timey alarm clock with a broken spring, a watermelon-shaped paperweight, a handheld dinner bell missing the little ringer inside. Things that had no place in my memory at all. But I knew the box had been a gift. I knew it had been full of items my colleagues collected. I knew I'd looked at it. So why couldn't I remember any of these? Who gave them to me? I tried to picture the faces of the people at the party. I could remember most of them. But when I tried to connect objects to names, the details slid away. Was it Josh or Joshua? Did one of them always wear an NHL cap, or was it NBA? I could remember outlines, impressions, but not facts. That was when I had a thought that made my stomach tighten. What if there are kinda people? People who exist on the edge of your life. People you see sometimes, talk to briefly, recognize but never truly know. Peripheral people. Pseudo-people. If that's possible, then surely I was a kinda person. in someone else's story. I shook the thought away, finished my beer, and stood up. I reached for the guest room door. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. I stared at it, confused. Had it always opened outward? Of course it had, I told myself. New apartment, new layout. I was still adjusting, and yet the certainty didn't feel solid. It felt like I'd just placed it there, because I needed something firm. I'm not naturally paranoid. All my years talking about kind of things, I treated them like a fun thought experiment. Some people made them into demon stories or ghost stories. I didn't. They were just a way to think about memory and permanence. They weren't supposed to be malicious. But after that night, I started feeling uneasy whenever I passed that room. Not a clear fear, not a specific thought, just an internal flinch, as if my body didn't want me to go in there. Like something inside that room could rearrange itself again if I wasn't paying attention. The worst part was wanting to check, because if I didn't check, I couldn't know for sure. And if I did check, I might find something new to doubt. Eventually, I decided I would kill the superstition by doing the most rational thing I could think of. I'd photograph everything in the box and write down the details. Then there would be a record. Then the uncertainty would be pinned down. It could even become a teaching tool. I could test my students' memory later, make a game of it, control it. One weekend night in late May, I dragged a small coffee table and a chair into the guest room. I opened the curtains to let moonlight in. I was tired from grading all day, and the world felt soft around the edges. But I told myself it was perfect. Quiet, focused. I took the box down from the closet shelf. The teddy bear keychain was right there, resting on top like it belonged. Nothing strange about that, I told myself, other than it being in the box at all. I picked it up. The eyes looked more mango than lemon now. I actually held it closer, trying to decide if it was the lighting. How could I have been so sure about lemon? Maybe moonlight shifted color. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd always been wrong. I forced myself to keep going. I pulled out the objects one by one, placing them in a neat line on the table, and snapping photos. I wrote descriptions in a notebook, measurements when I could, colors, shapes, chips, scratches. I tried to remember who had given me each item and realized, with a tightening throat, how many of the gifts had no donor attached in my mind. By the time I finished, there were about 36 objects lined up, each one a little uncertainty, made solid through attention. The last item I recorded was a small ceramic frog in a tuxedo, smoking a cigar. I remember that detail clearly. Cigar. Then there was noise outside, people in the street maybe laughing too loud, and I got up to close the guest room door. I paused with my hand on the knob, thinking about which direction it opened. Outward. I sat back down and looked at the ceramic frog again. It wasn't smoking a cigar. It was smoking a cigarette, long and thin. My stomach dipped. That was a small detail, but small details were the whole point. I had written cigar, then crossed it out, then written cigarette. Now it looked like a cigar again in my memory, and like a cigarette on the table. I couldn't stand that. Not after making the whole room into a controlled experiment. I moved back along the line of objects, double-checking everything. And the more I checked, the more I found mistakes. The alarm clock wasn't stuck on 125. It was stuck on 130. The broken spring curled 6 times, not 7. The end had a tiny twirl I hadn't noticed. I was making corrections when I reached the teddy bear keychain again. I wrote down its details one more time. My hand shook slightly. I laughed under my breath like I was embarrassed for taking it so seriously. I stood up. I needed a break. I went to the door and grabbed the handle. It didn't open outward. It didn't open inward either. I stepped back, feeling something heavy drop into my chest. I had opened this door before. I knew I had. I forced myself to breathe, turned the handle again, and pushed. The door swung outward easily. Relief flooded me so fast I almost got angry at myself for feeling it. Then I stopped. Why was I relieved? What had I thought would happen? There was no world where the door wouldn't open. The fact that I had expected otherwise made me feel sick. To prove to myself I was still in control, I closed it and opened it again, then again. Then a third time, adding a stupid little celebratory twirl like I was mocking my own fear. Mid-twirl, I saw the frog. It was definitely smoking a cigar. I stopped moving. I stared hard at it. I'd written cigar, crossed it out, written cigarette. And now it was cigar again, thick and obvious. I picked it up and held it to the moonlight. Cigar. No doubt. The cigar was as thick as the frog's fingers. A cigarette wouldn't match the proportions. I tried to anchor my mind with measurements like I always did. Reality through numbers, reality through comparison. I put it back down and looked at the table as a whole. Something was off. Not just one object. The arrangement, the feeling of the room. Without focusing on each item individually, I could sense there were things there I didn't recognize. Shapes my brain couldn't place. Like the room was slowly becoming unfamiliar while I stood beside it. For the first time, I considered that maybe kind of things weren't just a game. Maybe they weren't just about memory. Maybe there was something real in the way they lived on the edge of attention. Something that changed when watched. And if that was true, what happens when you gather 36 of them in one room? What happens when you close the door? Wait, I didn't close the door. I was sure I hadn't. I took a slow breath, trying to break the panic. I told myself I was tired and spiraling. The human brain is suggestible. I'd spent all day thinking about uncertainty, so of course my mind was finding patterns. I wasn't seeing ghosts. These were just roadside objects with stories attached to them. I grabbed the first thing my eyes landed on. A little glass snail missing one eye stalk. I flipped through my notes to confirm which eye it was. The snail wasn't in my notes. Not at all. Had I missed it? I stared at the page, then at the snail, then at the page again. My throat tightened. My mouth went dry. I flicked the snail across the room without thinking. It clinked softly against something I couldn't see. I grabbed my head with both hands and said no out loud. I needed to hear my own voice. I needed something normal. I decided to stop. Leave everything on the table and go to bed. I turned toward the window to close the curtains. There were no curtains. My hand hit wallpaper. I looked up, confused, and realized I was standing at the wrong end of the room. The window was supposed to be on the right. There was no window. I turned slowly and noticed two things at once. The door was slightly more to the right than I thought it was, and the coffee table was pressed against the left wall, not centered. Like I'd turned into a different room, and my brain was trying to pretend it was the same one. My eyes crossed. I saw double for a second. I shook my head hard. I went to the door, turned the handle, pushed outward. Nothing. The door didn't move. My pulse jumped. The room felt smaller, the air felt thick. I tried again, harder. Still nothing. Over the next few minutes, it felt like everything changed whenever I looked away. The door handle would be on the wrong side. The table would seem shifted. The wallpaper went from eggshell to something faintly maroon. The floor texture changed from fake wood to a flat brown plastic. The window was gone, then half there, then not there again. I pulled on the door. I pushed. It wouldn't open either way. I rushed to where the window should be and found a wall. Cold sweat broke out on my back. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't confused about the layout. I knew what was supposed to be there. I slapped my hand against the light switch and flipped it off, then on. The room changed. A closet door was open. A few items were in places I didn't remember. The table was angled. I flipped the switch again, faster. The light didn't come back on. I stood in darkness that didn't behave like darkness. I fumbled forward, expecting my hand to hit a wall. It didn't. I stepped and felt nothing under my foot that made sound. I moved my hands along what should have been the wall and found empty air. I tried to trace the perimeter of the room and realized there was no perimeter to trace. I stubbed my toe on something, but when I reached down, there was nothing. I tried to find the door, the closet, the table. After a while, I couldn't find any of them. It was like the room had been erased while I stood inside it. I lay down flat and spread my arms out, hoping to touch something, anything. The floor, a wall, a corner, a boundary. I touched nothing. I tried to crawl toward where the wall should have been and got turned around without ever feeling a corner. It was just me, and an impressionless void, like I had slipped behind the world. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The battery was low. The beam should have cut the dark. It lit only my hands. Everything beyond my fingers was black. Not the kind of black that reflects faintly. Not the kind that gives you hints. It swallowed the light completely. I got down and touched the floor and found a surface that felt matte and neutral, not cold or warm. The light didn't reflect off it. It was like shining a flashlight into a hole. I walked and walked. Sometimes I'd bump into something that felt like a wall, but when I turned, the path behind me was open. I jumped. My feet made no sound. I shouted. There was no echo, no reverb, like sound couldn't travel. When I screamed, I could hear it inside my head, but it didn't belong to the space around me. It felt like being trapped inside a cube that forgot it was supposed to be a room. Like angles didn't matter. Like gravity wasn't sure where down was. At one point, I tripped and felt myself roll, only to land as if I'd rolled onto what used to be a wall. The world had no consistent orientation. Everything could become anything if I stopped looking for half a second. Eventually, I stopped running and just walked forward. 10 minutes. No wall. 20. No wall. My heart slammed in my chest, and I could taste salt on my tongue. With nothing outside you, you become painfully aware of details you usually ignore. Your breathing, your heartbeat, the way tendons stretch with each step. And once you notice those things, you start asking why. Why is my body still obeying rules if the world isn't? I tried to think of things I knew for certain. My name, my parents, childhood friends. Even those wobbled slightly in my mind like I could feel the edges of uncertainty creeping in. What color were my mother's eyes? I suddenly realized I wasn't sure. That should have been impossible. And that teddy bear keychain, what did it really look like? That thought changed something. A flash, like a streetlight passing a speeding car. A reaction in the void. If the kind of things could drag me out here, maybe a kind of thing could also pull me back. I focused on the teddy bear. I tried to picture that first morning in the alley, drunk and sunburnt and confused, turning it over in my hands. I tried to lock the colors in place. But when I reached for the memory, there was nothing solid. Just black and white static, like the space between TV channels. Thinking about it made my hands itch, like my brain wanted to reject the thought the way your body rejects an irritant. So I went further back. That night on the couch, the curly-haired girl. The first time I heard the phrase kind of thing. What was her name? I couldn't remember. Had I ever seen her again? I couldn't remember that either. And suddenly, the whole night felt wrong. Had she known anyone at the party? Why was she the only girl there? Why didn't we exchange numbers? Why did she vanish at dawn like a character written only to deliver a message? My thoughts spiraled and the void seemed to widen, feeding on doubt. You are what you do. If everything you've done can be questioned, you start to feel like nothing. I dropped to my knees. It didn't hurt. Nothing hurt. It felt like the void had forgotten to apply consequences. At times I found myself floating inches above the ground, having to stretch my toes down to touch anything solid, just to remind myself I still existed. Then even that faded. The ground would vanish and return and vanish again. But I forced my mind back to the teddy bear. I pushed past the shifting colors and fractal images. Red, blue, gray, black, lime eyes, mango eyes. Past all of it. I looked for certainties that never changed. 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, a heart on its chest. Those were always there. I repeated it like a prayer. 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms and a heart, 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms and a heart. Something happened. The ground became solid again. A faint light appeared in the distance. For a moment I thought it was wallpaper, or lamps, or stars. My breath caught, because stars would mean sky, and sky would mean outside, and outside would mean the world. It was a night sky. I recognized constellations. I spun, pointing them out automatically, like I was proving to myself that I still belonged to the same universe as everyone else. I felt the ground under my feet, and the simple pleasure of that almost made me cry. 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, and a heart. As I completed a second spin, everything changed. My entire field of view was swallowed by something impossibly huge. An eye, not a metaphor, not a looks like. An eye so enormous that calling it a thing felt wrong. It was beyond size the way a planet is beyond size. It didn't sit in the sky like a moon. The universe itself looked like the darkness of its pupil, and it bore down on me from every direction at once. The word I began to ricochet in my mind like a trapped bird. I. It repeated until it stopped being a word and became noise. Then it broke apart into syllables that no longer meant anything. I shut my eyes hard and clutched the memory of the teddy bear like it was a lifeline. I imagined the texture under my fingers. I decided I had to commit to a truth. I had to force certainty into place. If doubt was the trap, then certainty had to be the key. I decided the teddy bear was blue with red details and lemon eyes. I decided it with the kind of stubbornness that feels like survival. When I opened my eyes, I saw dozens of coffee tables scattered in strange patterns across a flat, dark plain. Each table was covered in teddy bear keychains. Hundreds of them. Different shades, different hearts, different eye colors, different proportions. Every possible variation, like someone had generated them endlessly. The eye watched. It didn't speak, but I understood what it wanted. A selection, a choice, a certainty. It wanted me to pick the right one, like there was a correct answer hidden in infinite options. I had to show it the right kind of thing. I don't know how long I wandered among those tables, picking up keychains, turning them over, rejecting them. One was dark blue with yellow lining. One was almost green. Some had bigger hearts. Some had missing arms. Every combination you can imagine, and more. The eye was patient in a way that felt cruel. At some point, I realized the truth. There was no right one. The original didn't matter anymore. Maybe it never did. The moment it became uncertain, the moment I couldn't remember it perfectly, it fractured into possibilities. The original was gone, replaced by options. So I did the only thing I could. I chose one and made it true. I held a keychain up, stared at it, and decided it was mine. I decided it was the correct one, not because it matched memory, but because memory was no longer the authority. My choice was. I rolled it between my fingers, closed my eyes, and committed to it completely. Then light snapped on. My hand was on a wall. I was back in my guest room. The overhead light was on, humming softly. I was drenched in sweat, my shirt sticking to my spine. The coffee table was there, the mint green walls, the window, the curtains, the closet. All the kind of things were neatly lined up exactly where I'd left them, including the frog with the cigarette. My shaking hand found the door handle. I pushed outward. It opened effortlessly. I collapsed into the hallway, crying so hard I couldn't control it, clutching the teddy bear keychain like it was my own pulse. The next day, that entire box of kind of things went straight into the trash. I stopped telling the story in my lectures. I replaced it with something safer. Some boring metaphor about humpback whales and pattern recognition. It wasn't as effective. People love talking about their own weird little objects. Even now, years later, I still overhear students on campus talking about kind of things, even though I haven't mentioned them in 3 years. The idea survived without me. I photographed the teddy bear keychain and documented it obsessively. Every angle, every color, every measurement. I wrote it down so many times I could have done it in my sleep. I made it my anchor. It hasn't changed since. I know it better than the color of my mother's eyes because my mother's eyes don't matter in the same way anymore. This does. Sometimes I still feel uncertainty creep in around the edges of things. Not like paranoia, but like a breeze under a door. I think clustering kind of things triggers something, like a chain reaction. If you only have one, it stays mostly harmless. A small mistake in memory. A detail you can't nail down. But a cluster held together in one room, looked at too long, cataloged too hard, it becomes something else. A trap? I don't ask people that strange question anymore. I don't want to invite them into something they can't prepare for. But if you ever find a kind of thing on your own, do not treat it like a harmless thought experiment. Don't keep it in the periphery. Don't let it stay half-known. If you want to survive it, destroy its uncertainty. Photograph it, write it down, hold it until it becomes fixed. Make it real through repetition, through attention, through the kind of certainty that doesn't leave room for the edges to shift. Because if you leave it half remembered, it can pull you out there with it. People have all kinds of theories about what kind of things are. Demons touching objects nobody cares about. Ghosts, lost souls hiding in forgotten corners. I don't know. I don't think anyone can know for sure because the nature of a kind of things that it never stays fully knowable. But I do know this. As long as I have my anchor, I can keep my place in the world. 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms and a heart. My all-red teddy bear keychain with coal black eyes. Story 2. I'd had a weird, sour feeling in my stomach since morning. Maybe it was the flu coming on. Maybe it was nerves. Either way, it wouldn't go away. It sat there like a knot, tight and heavy, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Step up! Step up!" Shouts snapped me back to the moment. TSA. The security line was moving like thick traffic after an accident. Slow, frustrated, and full of people pretending they weren't stressed. Plastic bins scraped along the belt. People dumped their lives into gray trays. Phones, watches, wallets, tangled chargers. Couples whispered at each other in that tense airport way, like they were arguing but trying not to be heard. Someone behind me sighed dramatically. Somewhere ahead, a kid started crying. "Empty your pockets! Phone, keys, wallet in the bin. Carry-on on the belt. Shoes off. Let's go, let's go." A woman shouted from the side of the scanner. Her voice had that sharp edge, like she'd been repeating the same sentence for 8 straight hours and hated every word of it. For most of my adult life, I'd worked at the same company as an IT consultant. On paper, it sounded safe, comfortable. The kind of job your parents brag about. The reality was the opposite. My job wasn't calm. It was constant emergencies. Clients spread across different states. Systems held together by bad decisions and old patches. And one mistake that could bring whole offices to a stop. When things broke and couldn't be fixed remotely, I got the call. My supervisor, Jesse, had a special talent for sounding bored while ruining my day. She'd call in that flat voice and tell me to pack because my flight was already booked. Usually I'd get 1 or 2 days' notice. Usually. One time she called in the evening and said, casually, that I had a flight in the morning. Like she was reminding me to take out the trash. She didn't care what I'd planned, didn't care if I'd been up late already. If a client was angry and writing big checks, we moved. And we usually meant me. Whenever there was a trip, my workload doubled. I'd work late, sometime until the early morning, just to get my normal tasks out of the way before I disappeared to some other state to sit in a fluorescent-lit server room and be present, as if my body being there would magically fix everything. The couple in front of me finished their screening. I stepped up, still feeling that weird tightness in my stomach. I pulled off my belt as I walked, already tired. "Laptops out. Bins. Everything out of your pockets. Belts off. Shoes off. Phones, keys. Everything in a bin. Keep it moving," the TSA agent shouted, staring down the line like she was training recruits. "Easy. I'm doing it," I muttered, mostly to myself. I dropped my belt into a bin, emptied my pockets, pulled off my shoes and jacket, and stepped onto the scanner platform. The cold surface hit my bare feet. I raised my arms. The machine went off. I jumped. A wave of heat rushed up my neck and into my face. My stomach tightened harder. For a second, I couldn't think. Only felt that sudden panic. What did I forget? I'd taken everything out, hadn't I? "Back pocket into the bin and back through the scanner," the agent barked from behind the wall. I reached back, fingers searching. Coins. A few stupid coins must have slipped out of my wallet and settled into the fabric like they belonged there. "I'm really sorry. I'll just put 'em." "Move." She cut me off, sharp and fast like a wasp. What an asshole, I thought, dropping the coins into the tray and stepping back into the scanner. This time the machine stayed quiet. I passed through, grabbed my stuff from the other side, and shoved everything together with that rushed, clumsy energy you get when you feel watched and judged. And I did feel watched. As I walked away, I could still sense her eyes on my back. Night flight from Atlanta to Newark. Meeting first thing in the morning. A client had reported an outage right after a data migration. The kind of problem that made executives angry because the issue wasn't visible until it was suddenly everywhere. And because they paid our company millions a year, we sent someone on site to show effort. That someone was me. I got to Hartsfield-Jackson after dark, like always, cutting it close but not too close. I stopped by a wall for a second and leaned back, trying to get my breathing steady. Dizziness rolled through me, slow and unpleasant. I'd barely slept the night before. I hadn't eaten all day. I'd been trying to wrap up urgent tasks before I had to jump on a plane. My body was catching up with the lack of care. I need coffee, I thought, and forced myself to move. I grabbed a black coffee, no sugar, because if I added anything sweet, I'd just crash harder later. For balance, I grabbed 2 Snickers bars. It wasn't a real meal, but it was something. It felt like survival. As I unwrapped the candy bar and took a bite, I noticed a young woman standing not far from the gate area. She wasn't unattractive, but that wasn't why my eyes went to her. It was something else, something harder to explain. Most people in an airport show emotion even when they try to hide it. You can see it in their movements: annoyance, excitement, impatience, sadness, relief. People hug, people argue quietly, people laugh too loudly. People pace while they talk on the phone like the floor is on fire. This woman didn't do any of that. She stood completely still, like she'd been placed there. Her face was pale and empty, no expression at all. Her eyes were fixed on one spot, not a phone, not a sign, not another person, just nothing. And then there was the backpack. She looked around 30, maybe a little younger, and yet she wore a bright pink backpack with a unicorn head sticking out of it. Not a small charm. A full unicorn head, like a stuffed toy built into the bag. It looked childish, out of place, almost like it belonged to someone else. I tried not to stare, but I did anyway, chewing my Snickers and sipping coffee as if that made it normal. Then she turned her head toward me. Not slowly, not casually. Like something snapped her attention to place. Her eyes met mine. They were empty, cold. Not angry, not curious, absent. Like she was looking through me instead of at me. My skin prickled. I flinched and looked away too fast, and my coffee spilled onto my shirt. Great. Karma for staring at people, I said under my breath, annoyed and embarrassed. At least I had a spare shirt in my bag. I pulled my phone out and sent Jesse a short message. Already through security. Boarding soon. Jessie expected updates no matter what time it was, as if I was reporting from a war zone. She replied within a minute. "Okay, client wants to see you at 8. I stared at the message, scoffed, and put my phone away. No thanks. No safe flight. Nothing. Typical Jessie. Boarding started. I got in line with everyone else, squeezing forward while people blocked the aisle with their carry-ons like they'd never been on a plane before. The usual chaos, overhead bins snapping open and shut, someone apologizing too much, someone not apologizing at all. My seat was 14B, middle seat, the perfect place to have no view, no space, and no dignity. I sat down, shoved my bag under the seat in front of me, clicked my seatbelt, and looked around the cabin just to give my mind something else to do. Then a cold sweat slid down my back. The woman with the pink unicorn backpack stepped onto the plane. My first thought was childish and automatic. Please don't sit anywhere near me. I watched her move down the aisle. She wasn't rushing like everyone else. She walked with a slow, steady pace, her face still blank. She was coming closer. My stomach tightened again. When she reached around row 12, I shut my eyes for a moment, like that could make her disappear. I felt stupid for being so unsettled. It wasn't just that I'd been caught staring at her earlier. It was the feeling she gave off. Like standing near a deep freezer. Like being close to something that shouldn't be alive. I opened my eyes about 30 seconds later. She wasn't in my row. I turned my head and looked back through the gap between the seats. Row 22C. A few rows behind me across the aisle. She sat with the backpack on her lap, one arm wrapped around it. She didn't look around, didn't settle in, didn't check her phone, didn't even adjust her seatbelt. She just stared at the seat in front of her like she was waiting for instructions. A chill crawled up my neck. I told myself I was overreacting. Airports are full of strange people. Maybe she was exhausted. Maybe she was on medication. Maybe she'd had a terrible day. Still, I kept glancing back, pulled by that same uneasy curiosity. The flight attendants did the safety demonstration. People ignored it like always. The plane pushed back and started to taxi, the engines rising and falling with that familiar sound. Then we accelerated. The force pushed me into my seat, and then that gentle but unmistakable lift. Wheels leaving the ground, the city lights dropping away. Atlanta shrinking beneath us. The cabin lights dimmed. A little while later, the seatbelt sign turned off. The plane settled into that steady cruise feeling. A low murmur filled the cabin. Quiet conversations. Someone laughing too loudly at something on their phone. The rustle of snack bags. The woman by the window next to me fell asleep almost immediately and started snoring, loud and steady. The guy in front of me asked a flight attendant for water. A few people stood up and started squeezing down the aisle toward the restroom. People. We just took off, I thought, pressing my fingers against my temple. Then light turbulence started. Even after years of flying, turbulence always tied my stomach into knots. My body didn't care how many times my brain said it was normal. My brain could list facts. My body only understood falling. I glanced out the window and saw the wing flexing slightly. I knew it was designed to do that. I knew it was fine. It still made my chest tighten. I looked back at the woman with the unicorn backpack. She didn't react at all. Her head moved with the motion of the plane, but the rest of her body stayed rigid. Her eyes didn't blink much. She looked like a mannequin someone had strapped into a seat. The captain's voice came on. "We've entered an area of light turbulence. Please fasten your seatbelts." I did. The click sounded too loud in my ears. The fear eased a bit once I was strapped in, and the exhaustion of the last 2 days finally hit me like a blanket. My eyes grew heavy. My thoughts slowed. The cabin noise turned soft and distant. I drifted off. It didn't last. A bright light burned through my eyelids. I opened my eyes and squinted forward. The guy in front of me had his laptop open, screen at full brightness, blasting some movie like he was alone in his living room. "Damn, people really don't think," I muttered. I leaned forward and tapped his seat lightly. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice polite. "Could you dim that? It's really bright in my eyes." He didn't even turn around. "Fuck off, man," he said like I'd insulted him. My jaw tightened. What an asshole, I thought, and hit the call button. The small light above my seat turned on. A flight attendant walked up with a wide, practiced smile. "How can I help you?" "Sorry," I said quietly, nodding toward the seat in front of me. "But his laptop screen is really blinding me." I asked him to lower it, but he refused. The flight attendant leaned forward and spoke in a firm, professional tone. "Sir, please dim your laptop. You're disturbing other passengers." The man lowered the brightness, muttering something under his breath like he was the victim. "Thank you," I said to the flight attendant. She nodded and moved on. I tried to get comfortable again. About an hour had passed, maybe halfway to Newark. I couldn't wait to land, get to a hotel, take a shower, and sleep. I also hoped Jessie had finally learned to book something near the airport instead of some cheap place an hour away. Last time she'd done that, I'd spent more time in a rideshare than in bed. I stretched carefully, rolling my shoulders. That's when the unease returned, stronger now. The same feeling from the morning, but heavier, like it had grown teeth. Without thinking, I looked back. The woman in 22C was standing up. Slowly, like her joints were stiff, she pulled the unicorn backpack onto her shoulders, not carrying it in her hand, wearing it. My first thought was maybe she's going to the restroom. But why take the backpack? She stepped into the aisle and started walking toward the front of the plane. Her movements were wrong. Not exactly robotic, not exactly drunk. More like someone acting out walking without any natural rhythm. Each step looked planned. Her arms stayed close to her sides. Her face remained blank. I glanced around. I wasn't the only one watching. Other passengers looked up, caught a glimpse of her, then looked away quickly, like instinct told them not to get involved, like they'd sensed something off and wanted to pretend it wasn't real. I couldn't look away. As she passed my row, a cold sensation slid over my skin, like the temperature had dropped just for her. The smell of her was faint, clean, almost like laundry detergent. But there was something underneath it that reminded me of metal. She kept going. Up near the front, the cockpit door opened. One of the pilots stepped out, probably heading to the restroom. A flight attendant stood near the cockpit entrance, positioned the way they always are to block access. For half a second, everything looked normal. Then the woman with the unicorn backpack lunged forward. Not a fast walk, not a shove. A sudden sprint, violent and straight, like an animal charging. Her expression changed so fast it scared me more than the movement. Her face twisted into something raw and furious, eyes wide, mouth tense, like something inside her had been waiting for this moment. I froze. My hands gripped the seat in front of me so hard my fingers hurt. What the hell is happening? She slammed into the pilot at full speed. The impact was sickening, like a body hitting a wall. Her shoulder smashed into the flight attendant, sending her sideways. The flight attendant's head cracked against the first row of seats, and she collapsed. The pilot stumbled backward into the cockpit. He looked shocked, confused, like his brain couldn't accept what was happening. The cockpit door slammed shut. The sound of it closing hit the cabin like a gunshot. Silence swallowed everything for a moment. 10 seconds, maybe. 10 seconds where nobody screamed because nobody understood yet. The air felt thick, like it had been replaced by fear. 2 pilots are in there, I told myself. 2. They can handle her. Then a short scream of pain came from inside the cockpit. Right after that, the plane lurched. Hard. My hips lifted slightly against the seatbelt. Pressure slammed into my head. My stomach jumped into my throat. The sleeping woman next to me was thrown sideways, waking with a startled gasp. Something heavy hit the ceiling behind us. The man's laptop in front of me flew up, smacked the ceiling, and then bounced backward, hitting someone a couple rows behind with a dull, horrible thud. The plane dropped again, even harder, and the cabin erupted. Screams. Prayers. A loud rising panic that had nowhere to go. People without seatbelts lifted out of their seats, bodies slamming into the ceiling like rag dolls. Loose objects spun through the air, phones, headphones, a plastic cup, someone's jacket. The force felt like it was trying to pull my skeleton apart. I felt a sharp snap in my neck and stars flashed in my vision. Blood rushed to my head so fast it made my eyes throb. The engines roared. Then the plane jerked upward violently. My forehead smashed into the seat in front of me, pain bursting across my face. I tasted blood. Everything that had been lifted came crashing down at once. The sound was worse than the screaming. It was the sound of impact, of bodies hitting armrests and seats and each other, mixed with muffled cries. Somewhere nearby, I heard a sharp crack that made my stomach twist, a sound that could only be bone. Then, as suddenly as it started, the plane leveled out. The screaming dropped into sobbing and strained breathing. A few people moaned in pain. Someone near the back kept whispering the same prayer over and over. The intercom crackled. For a long moment, there was only static. Then heavy breathing came through the speakers, slow and close to the microphone, like someone holding it too near their mouth. A hoarse female voice spoke. "We're almost there." The intercom went dead again. Every hair on my arms rose. My body ached everywhere. My neck felt wrong. My forehead was wet. I wiped it, and my fingers came away red. I stared at the cockpit door. My throat felt tight, like I couldn't swallow. Around me, passengers were injured and stunned. A flight attendant was on her knees in the aisle, holding her head with one hand. Her mouth moved like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then another surge hit. The plane rolled sharply to the right so fast, entire rows slammed in that direction. Luggage shifted in the overhead bins with loud bangs. People screamed again. The woman from 14C slammed into me, her face pressed against mine, nails digging into my forearm. Her breath was hot and frantic as she screamed directly into my ear. We're going to die. It's over. We're going to die here. Her voice cut off suddenly when a foam flew across the aisle and struck her hard. Her body went limp against me for a second before sliding back into her seat. The plane started dropping again. Pressure tore at my ears like invisible hands. It felt like the worst drop on a roller coaster, except it didn't end. My stomach felt like it was floating, then smashing back down. Please, I said, my voice breaking. Let this end. The nose of the plane shot upward again. I was slammed into my seat, pinned by the force. My face felt heavy, like gravity had doubled. My chest was being crushed. I fought for air, each breath thin and shaky. Everything blurred at the edges. This awful up and down, this violent playing with the controls, it could only mean two things. Either one of the pilots was still alive and fighting for control, trying to recover, or that woman was doing it on purpose. Everything stabilized again. The cockpit door opened slowly, as if whoever was inside wanted everyone to see. The woman with the unicorn backpack stepped out into the aisle. She stood there like she owned the plane. She looked around the cabin, calm now, like she was inspecting her work, like she was checking a room after a storm. I could barely move, but my eyes locked on her anyway. Then she turned her head and looked straight at me. Not past me, not through me, at me. A crushing dread washed over me. It wasn't just fear. It felt like pressure, like my body recognized something dangerous on a level deeper than thought. Her eyes widened slightly, and then she smiled. It was too big, too pleased. A smile that didn't belong on a human face in a moment like this. It wasn't relief or joy. It was hunger. I felt like I was sitting in front of a predator that had decided I was interesting. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. She held my gaze for one more second, then turned without rushing and walked back into the cockpit, as if she had all the time in the world. The intercom clicked on again. "We're landing," the same hoarse female voice said. "Fasten your seatbelts." The plane tipped downward, not a normal descent. It angled like a dive. My stomach rose into my throat. The force pushed my insides back into the seat. My cheeks pulled, my vision shook, and I knew, deep in that place where your mind stops lying to you, that there was no smooth landing coming. We were going down hard. And through all of it, through the screaming and the prayers and the rattling metal, I couldn't stop thinking about that pink unicorn backpack. Bright and childish, on the shoulders of something that didn't feel human at all. Story 3. I didn't plan on getting a dog. It wasn't some lifelong dream or something I'd been saving for. I just hit a point where I couldn't stand walking into my apartment and feeling like I was stepping into a box that had been sealed all day. I live alone. I work long shifts. By the time I get home, my brain feels scraped clean. Most nights, I don't cook. I don't call anyone. I just drop my keys on the counter, sit on the couch, and scroll on my phone until my eyes close on their own. Then I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning with the screen still glowing in my hand and my neck bent at a weird angle. I told myself a dog might help. Something living in the apartment besides me. Something that would force me to go outside, keep a routine. Maybe even make the place feel less like a waiting room. That's how I found Leo. The shelter was a small place tucked behind a strip of businesses. The parking lot was cracked, and the sign looked sun-faded, like it had been there for 20 years. Inside, it smelled like disinfectant, layered on top of wet fur. A couple of volunteers moved around in old jeans and t-shirts, speaking in soft voices the way people do in places where too many things are scared. I didn't go in with a plan. I thought I'd walk around, look at a few dogs, maybe come back later. That's what I told myself, at least. A woman at the front desk asked what I was looking for. I said, "Something calm. I work a lot. I want a dog that can handle being alone sometimes." Her smile tightened a little, like she'd heard that sentence 1,000 times and always wished people meant something else. But she nodded and told me they had a dog I should meet. Leo was in a corner kennel by himself. Medium-sized tan coat, dark eyes, ears that didn't fully stand up. He didn't rush the gate when I approached. He didn't bark. He didn't jump. He just sat down and looked at me. Not in a dog way. Not with that eager, happy-to-see-you energy. He looked like he was thinking. One of the shelter workers came over and leaned on the kennel door. She said, almost like she was sharing gossip, "He's not really a stray. More like a regular." I asked what she meant. "He's been hanging around the same neighborhood for years," she told me. "People feed him. Shop owners know him. He shows up, sits around, leaves, comes back. One of the guys who works near there swears the dog knows the area better than most residents." That sounded kind of sweet in a sad way. Like he'd made himself a place in the world without really belonging to anyone. Then she added, "The weird part is everyone says the same thing about him." I asked what. She looked at Leo through the bars and said, "He just sits there." Apparently, he'd stay on the same corner for hours, watching cars, watching people, not chasing them, not wagging his tail, just sitting like he was waiting. And the way she said it made my stomach tighten a little, even though it shouldn't have. She told me he didn't bark much, didn't beg, didn't approach anyone unless they approached him first. If someone tried to pet him, he'd let them. If they walked away, he didn't follow. I told myself that was good. Calm. Stable. Maybe older. Maybe just used to people coming and going. When they brought him out into the little visiting room, he walked in a straight line and sat down again right at my feet, facing the door, like he wanted to keep it in his sight. I crouched and held out my hand. He sniffed it once, then leaned forward and pressed his forehead into my palm. Not a lick, not a playful nudge, just a steady, quiet pressure, like he was confirming something. The worker said, "He's been like that since he showed up." I asked if he had a chip. "He did," she said. "But it doesn't go anywhere. No name attached, no registered owner. We tried. It's like it was wiped." That should have made me pause, but my brain was already making excuses. People abandon dogs. Paperwork gets messed up. Systems fail. It happens. I filled out the forms, paid the fee, took him home the same day. Bringing him into my apartment felt like changing the air. Not in a dramatic way. Just like the place had been holding its breath, and now it didn't have to. Leo did a slow walk around the rooms like he was mapping them. He sniffed the couch, the kitchen trash can, the bathroom doorway. He stopped at the bedroom and stared inside for a long moment before stepping in. When he came out, he went to the living room and sat again, back straight, facing the hallway. I bought him a bed and put it near the couch. He ignored it. He chose the hard floor instead, right where the hallway opened up, like he wanted a clear view of everything. At home, he was easy. Too easy, honestly. Sirens didn't bother him. Loud neighbors didn't faze him. When somebody knocked on the door, he didn't react, not even a head tilt. No barking, no running to the entrance. The first time it happened, I actually got up in a panic because I thought he might be deaf. I clapped behind him, snapped my fingers. He turned his head and looked at me like I was being strange. He could hear. He just didn't care. The only thing that stood out was that sometimes I'd catch him staring into corners of the apartment. Not like a dog hearing a tiny sound. Not like he was confused or curious. More like he was watching something. The first time I noticed it, I was brushing my teeth. I walked back into the living room and saw him sitting near the bookshelf, head lifted, eyes locked on the corner where the ceiling met the wall. He didn't blink much. He didn't move his ears. His body was still in a way that made me stop walking. I stood behind him and followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just beige paint, shadow, the faint line where the ceiling dipped. "Leo," I said softly. He didn't look at me. I waved my hand in front of his face. Nothing. Then, after a long moment, he blinked, turned his head toward me, and stood up like he'd just finished a job. He walked away and lay down. I told myself it was a dog thing. Dogs see reflections, hear pipes, track smells. My apartment was old. Maybe the walls creaked. Maybe he was adjusting. I tried not to overthink it. The night everything started, I got home from work feeling like my body was full of sand. I barely remembered taking my shoes off. I just collapsed on the couch with the TV on, not even caring what was playing. The glow and noise were like a blanket. Leo lay on the floor in his usual spot, facing the hallway, not sleeping, not moving much, just there. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up because the screen went black. At first, I thought the show had ended. Then I realized the entire TV had shut off, like the power had cut. The room went oddly quiet, the way it does when a constant sound disappears and your ears suddenly notice the silence. A second later, the floor lamp dimmed. Not completely off, just a dip, like it took a breath. Then it flickered back to normal brightness. I sat up, heart already starting to race for no reason I could explain. Then I heard something slide across the floor. Not loud, just a soft scrape. Like paper being pushed or something thin being dragged slowly. It was enough to make my stomach drop straight down. Leo was already standing. He wasn't standing in a relaxed way. His body was stiff, legs planted like he was bracing. He was at the door, staring at it, head slightly lowered. "Leo," I whispered. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. I forced myself off the couch and walked toward the entryway. Every step felt too loud. When I got closer, I saw something on the floor just inside the apartment. A flyer. It had been slid under my door. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for my brain to catch up. I live on the 3rd floor. No open windows. My front door doesn't have a big gap under it. And I was sure I'd locked it. I checked the lock automatically, like a habit I can't break. Still, there it was. Thick, glossy paper, the kind that feels expensive. Not a thin coupon sheet. Not junk mail. It read, "Happy Tales Doggy Daycare." The design was clean and bright, with a smiling golden retriever on the front, and a pastel color scheme that looked carefully chosen. It didn't look like something someone printed at home. It looked like something a business paid real money for. I picked it up. It was warm, like it hadn't been sitting in a cold hallway for long. I opened the door and looked out. The hallway was empty. My building's corridor isn't long. You can see both ends if you step out and look. There were no footsteps fading away, no elevator ding, no neighbor fumbling with keys, just the hum of old lights and the quiet that settles late at night. I stepped into the hall and looked left, then right. Nothing. I went back inside and shut the door, turning the lock so hard it clicked twice. Leo didn't relax. He stood near my leg, eyes still on the door, like he expected something to push through it. I should have thrown the flyer out. The smart thing would have been to crumple it up, toss it, and tell myself it was some weird late-night marketing stunt. Instead, I kept it. Part of it was practical. The flyer advertised the free temperament test and 1 free day of daycare. I work long hours, and I'd been worrying about leaving Leo alone too much. It felt like the universe handing me an answer. Another part of it was less rational. The flyer didn't feel random. It felt aimed, like it had found me, not the other way around. I put it on the counter and tried to go back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The apartment felt off. Not colder exactly. Not louder. Just wrong in a quiet way, like the rooms had changed shape while I wasn't looking. Leo stayed awake all night. I could hear his nails click softly on the floor as he shifted positions, always near the hallway, always facing the door or the dark space beyond it. The next day, on my lunch break, I called the number on the flyer. They picked up on the first ring, not the second, not the third. The first, like someone had been sitting there waiting with a hand on the phone. "Happy Tales, Doggy Daycare," a woman said. Her voice was bright, too bright, like she was smiling hard enough to hurt. I told her I'd gotten a flyer and wanted to ask about the free temperament test. "Oh, yes," she said, and there was a tiny pause that didn't match her tone. "We'd love to see you." It shouldn't have sounded strange. Businesses want customers. People are friendly on the phone. But something about the way she said it made my skin prickle, like she was excited in a personal way, not a professional one. We set an appointment for Saturday. When I hung up, I realized my hand was sweating. I stared at my phone for a moment and laughed quietly at myself. I was acting like a flyer was haunted. That week went by like normal, except it didn't. Little things stacked up. Leo started sitting by the front door more often. Not all day. He still ate, drank water, followed me room to room sometimes. But whenever the apartment got quiet, he'd drift back to that spot and just watch. I caught him staring into corners more frequently, too. And when he did, his ears would flatten slightly, like he was listening to something that wasn't sound. One night I woke up around 3 because I felt like someone was standing in the bedroom doorway. There was no one there. The doorway was empty, but Leo was awake, sitting at the foot of the bed, staring directly into that doorway like he could see a person I couldn't. I whispered his name. He didn't look at me. After a long minute, he lay down again without relaxing, chin on his paws, eyes still open. Saturday came. I told myself I was being ridiculous and loaded Leo into the car. He jumped into the back seat easily, but he didn't do his usual routine of looking out the window. Normally, he liked to watch the world pass. He'd track pedestrians, tilt his head at bikes, follow cars with his eyes like he was reading something in their movement. This time he sat facing forward, stiff and quiet. The daycare was on a road I take all the time. A familiar road lined with places I could name without looking. A grocery store, a pharmacy, a fast food place, a tire shop. And yet somehow I'd never noticed the building before. It wasn't hidden behind trees. It wasn't tucked into an alley. It was right there, set back from the street behind a neat fence. A clean sign out front said Happy Tales with a little paw print logo. I slowed down, confused, like my eyes were playing tricks. How had I missed this place? That should have been my first red flag, but I ignored it the way you ignore a bad feeling when you don't want to deal with it. I parked and walked Leo to the entrance. The air smelled faintly sweet, like flowers or air freshener. Inside didn't look like a normal daycare. It looked like an indoor park. There was fake grass, so green it looked unreal. Decorative trees spaced around the room like props. Sunlight poured in from a glass ceiling, bright and warm, with no harsh shadows. Everything looked too perfect, too clean, like a staged photo. There were no barking dogs, no excited chaos, no wet nose smell, just quiet. A woman behind the front desk looked up and smiled at me. Her smile was wide, polished, practiced. Then she looked down at Leo. "Hi, Leo," she said. I stopped walking. I hadn't told her his name. I hadn't filled out paperwork yet. I hadn't introduced him. I'd barely even said hello. For half a second, I thought maybe I'd said it without realizing. But no, I'd been too busy taking in the weird quiet of the place. My mouth went dry. "How?" I started. Before I could finish, a second employee appeared from a side door, also smiling, and said, "We'll take him for the temperament test now." Leo didn't want to go. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't growl. He didn't thrash. But his body went heavy in that way dogs do when they refuse to move. He leaned back toward me, nails gripping the floor. The worker gently tugged the leash. Leo finally stepped forward, but he kept glancing back at me, eyes dark and focused, like he was trying to tell me something without making a sound. Then he disappeared through the side door. The woman at the desk asked me to sit. She offered water. I said no. I sat anyway, hands tight in my lap. Minutes passed in a way that didn't feel normal. The waiting room was quiet, but the quiet wasn't relaxing. It pressed in. I could hear the faint hum of lights, the distant hiss of something like ventilation. Every so often I heard a soft thump from behind the door, like a paw on the floor, but no barking, no staff voices, nothing that sounded like a real test. I stood up once and tried to look through the window in the side door, but the glass was frosted. I couldn't see anything, just vague shadow. When the worker returned, she didn't bring Leo right away. She came out alone, smiling like the front desk woman, and said, "He's doing great." I asked if I could see him. "Just a moment," she said, and went back through the door. When Leo finally came out, he ran straight to me, not trotting, not calm walking, running, like he'd been released from something. The leash was still in the worker's hand, but Leo pulled so hard it looked like he might drag her over. The worker stumbled a little, then caught herself, still smiling. I bent down and grabbed Leo by the collar, steadying him. His body was shaking, not the happy kind of shaking. His breath came quick. He pressed against my legs like he was trying to climb into my skin. I looked up. Now there were 4 employees behind the front desk, all smiling, the exact same way. Not similar. Not, they're in customer service, smiling. Their expressions matched like copies. Same teeth, same cheeks lifted, same blank eyes that didn't soften. The front desk woman said, "He passed. You can bring him back any time. We'd love to have him." Her tone made my stomach tighten again. It sounded like the woman on the phone. Too excited, too sure. I forced a laugh and said something like, "Great. Yeah, thank you." Because my brain was stuck in normal mode, trying to keep everything polite even while my instincts screamed that something was wrong. I walked Leo out. The instant we crossed the threshold, the air felt different. The sweet smell dropped away. The sunlight outside looked real again. The parking lot noise, cars passing, a distant siren felt like proof that I still lived in the normal world. I got Leo into the car and locked the doors without thinking. On the drive home, he didn't look out the window like he usually did. He didn't move at all. He sat stiff in the back seat, facing forward, eyes wide and fixed on the space between the front seats, like he was watching the road through me. I tried talking to him. I said his name. I asked if he was okay. I told myself I was soothing him, but really I was trying to soothe myself. He didn't respond. Not with his eyes, not with a head tilt, not with a sigh. When we got back to the apartment, he rushed inside and immediately went to the hallway, spot where he usually sat. Then he stood there, staring into the empty air like he was waiting for something to appear. The rest of the day felt wrong. I kept expecting a knock or a sound in the hall. I checked the lock twice, then 3 times. I told myself I was being paranoid. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd signed up for something without reading the fine print of reality. That night, I went to bed early, drained from the strange tension of the day. Sleep came fast, heavy and thick. Then I woke up to barking. Not Leo's usual quiet huff or a warning woof. This was full barking, deep and sharp, the kind that makes your heart slam against your ribs. I jolted upright, disoriented. The apartment was dark except for the dim glow from the streetlights outside. Leo was standing in the hallway. His teeth were bared. His body was braced like he was about to attack. And he was staring at nothing. At first I thought maybe someone was in the apartment. Maybe the door had been forced. Maybe someone had slipped in. Maybe I'd been careless. I swung my legs out of bed and stepped into the hallway. My bare feet touched the cold floor. "Leo?" I whispered. And my voice came out thin. He didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on the empty space near the living room corner, the same corner he'd stared at before, but this time his lips were pulled back so far I could see all of his teeth. His growl started low and rose like a motor. I followed his gaze. There was nothing there. No shape, no shadow that didn't belong, no movement. And yet I felt it. The air felt heavier, like the room had filled with something invisible. My skin prickled and my throat tightened as if I'd stepped into a place where oxygen didn't work the same way. The apartment didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied. I tried to swallow. My mouth was dry. My mind searched for anything normal to hold on to, pipes, drafts, a neighbor's noise, a dream I hadn't fully woken from. But Leo wasn't dreaming. He was awake, alert, ready. And somehow the most terrifying part wasn't his barking. It was the way he stood there like he'd been preparing for this, like he knew exactly where to look, like he'd been waiting. I don't know how to explain it in a way that sounds sane, but standing in that hallway, watching my dog threaten an empty corner, I understood something all at once. Whatever had followed us home from that place, Leo wasn't surprised. Leo had been waiting for it. Story 4. I haven't told anyone this yet. Not my sister. Not the people I work with. Nobody. I'm only writing it here because I don't know what else to do, and because I haven't slept right in almost 3 weeks. I moved into this house in March. There's nothing special about it. It's a single-story place in an older neighborhood. The street is quiet most of the time, except on Thursday mornings when the garbage truck comes way too early and makes the whole block feel like it's shaking. I picked this house because the rent was fair and I was tired of apartment living. That's the whole reason. No bad feeling when I toured it. No strange vibe, no moment where I thought I shouldn't be her. It was just a house, and I needed somewhere to live. I work nights at a logistics company. It's the kind of job where time moves slowly. Data entry, reports, tracking numbers, fixing mistakes that shouldn't have happened in the first place. I usually get home around 1 a.m., sometimes closer to 2 if things run late. The first time I noticed the porch light was on when I got back, I didn't even get worried. I honestly thought I'd forgotten to turn it off before leaving. I was tired, half asleep, keys still in my hand. I walked in, flicked the switch down, watched the light go off through the window, and went to bed. The next morning, I didn't think about it. Not once. It didn't feel like anything. Then it happened again. At first, it was just annoying. I'd come home, see the porch light on, and I'd feel that little wave of irritation. Like when you find the fridge door slightly open, and you know it was your fault, but you don't remember doing it. I kept assuming I'd done it without thinking, like muscle memory. Turn it off, go inside, sleep. But after a while, I started to notice a pattern that wasn't really a pattern at all, which was what made it worse. If it had happened every night, I would have called an electrician right away. It would have been simple. Something wrong with the wiring, a bad switch, an easy fix. But it didn't do that. It was random. 3 nights in a row, nothing. Then one night it's on. Then a whole week where everything seems normal. Then suddenly 2 nights back to back. It got to a point where I started doubting my own memory. I'd stand in my kitchen at 1:30 in the morning, looking at the wall switch, and I'd ask myself, did I turn it off before I left? Am I the one turning it on when I come in without noticing? Am I sleepwalking? Am I so tired I'm not forming memories, right? So I opened a note on my phone and started logging it. Nothing dramatic. Just the date and a few words. Light on again. Nothing. Off when I got home. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself I was collecting information so I could stop guessing. That note has 23 entries now. I mentioned it to a coworker, Marcus, during a slow night. Marcus is the type who always has an explanation for things, even when he doesn't actually know. He told me it was probably just to shorten the switch. He said his bathroom fan used to turn on by itself for half a year before he replaced the switch plate, and after that, it never happened again. He talked about it like it was nothing, like it was the most normal thing in the world. That explanation made me feel better for maybe 4 days. Then, one afternoon, I actually looked closely at my porch light switch, not just a glance. I got down near it like I was inspecting it. And that's when I noticed something that should have calmed me down, but somehow did the opposite. The switch was new. Not in good condition, new. It looked recently replaced. The edges had that fresh look, and around the plate there was the faint smell of paint, like someone had painted the wall and put the plate back on before it fully dried. It wasn't ancient hardware, struggling along in an old house. It wasn't something worn out. It wasn't loose. It didn't wiggle. It felt solid and normal. I didn't tell Marcus that part. I don't know why. Maybe because the more I said out loud, the more real it felt. Maybe because I didn't want to hear him laugh and tell me I was being dramatic. I should say this clearly. I'm not someone who believes in paranormal stuff. I didn't grow up with ghost stories. My family was practical. If something creaked in the night, my dad would have checked the pipes, not blamed spirits. If I had gone to him and said, "I think the porch light is turning on by itself," he would have told me to stop working nights, drink less caffeine, and call an electrician. And honestly, for a while I kept telling myself the same thing. It's wiring. It's a timer. It's a sensor. It's a mistake. It's anything except what my brain kept trying to turn it into at 2 a.m. when the house was silent and the street outside looked like a black tunnel. But I also knew my own mind well enough to realize that if I didn't get proof, real proof, I was going to keep spiraling. I was going to keep questioning whether it was happening at all. So I set up my old phone to record. I propped it on a shelf across from the front door, leaned it against a few books so the camera angle was steady. From there you could see the porch light switch clearly, and you could also see a small slice of the door window where the porch light glow would show up if it came on. I turned the light off. I stared at it for a few seconds like I was daring it to do something. Then I double-checked the phone was actually recording, and I went to bed. In the morning, I opened the video. At 2:17 a.m., the porch light turned on. I watched it once and felt my stomach drop. I watched it again and leaned closer, like I'd missed something. I watched it a third time and realized my hands were shaking slightly, which isn't something that happens to me often. The switch didn't move. There was no click. No hand came into frame. Nothing bumped it. Nothing pulled it. The light just changed from dark to bright, like someone had edited the video. One moment the entryway was dim. The next there was that warm yellow glow spilling into the glass and onto the floor, and the switch was still pointing down. That should not be possible. At least not in any way that made sense. I sent the clip to Marcus with one message: "Explain this." He wrote back a little later and said it was probably a ground fault issue. He sent me a YouTube link about electrical gremlins in older houses. Like this stuff happens all the time if the wiring is weird. I didn't respond. I didn't even know what to say. Because even if there was some rare electrical explanation, it didn't change the feeling in my gut when I watched that video. It didn't change the fact that the light wasn't just flickering. It wasn't dimming. It wasn't acting like a loose connection. It was fully off and then fully on, clean as flipping a switch, except the switch didn't flip. A few days later, I talked to my neighbor across the street. His name is Dave. He's retired, probably late 60s. He's the kind of guy who's always outside doing something, always adjusting a sprinkler, sweeping his driveway, trimming a bush that doesn't really need trimming. He notices everything. If your trash can tips over, he's the type to set it back up before you even realize it happened. I didn't know him well. We'd waved a couple times. That was about it. But I figured if anyone would know something about the neighborhood, it would be him. So on a Saturday morning, I walked across the street and knocked on his door. When he answered, I didn't waste time easing into it. I asked him if he knew anything about my house, if there were any issues, anything I should know. Dave looked at me for a second, and there was a pause that felt just slightly too long, like he was deciding what to say and what not to say. Then he told me the family before me had the same problem with the porch light. That alone made the air feel colder around my shoulders. Not because it was scary yet, but because it meant I wasn't imagining it. It meant it wasn't my sleep schedule or my memory or something I was doing without realizing. Dave said they thought it was electrical too. They had someone come out, twice, he said. Both times the person couldn't find anything wrong. No bad wiring, no faulty switch, nothing that explained it. I asked how long it had gone on. Dave said the whole time they lived there, about 14 months. I asked why they moved. He hesitated again, then he said the light wasn't the only reason. I pushed him, gently at first, then a little more. I told him I'd been losing sleep. I told him I'd recorded it turning on by itself. I didn't say ghost. I didn't say anything like that. I just asked him what else had happened. Dave finally told me the wife used to see someone outside at night. He said it would be on the porch, or close to it, and it always seemed to happen when the porch light was on. Not running around, not breaking in, just standing there. Sometimes at the edge of the porch, sometimes closer to the steps, always still, always like they had a reason to be there. I asked if the husband saw it too. Dave said he didn't know. He only ever heard it from the wife, but he believed her. He said she wasn't the type to make things up, and she didn't sound like she was trying to convince people. She sounded scared, but also confused, like she didn't know how to describe what she was seeing. Then Dave said one thing that has stayed in my head ever since. He said she told him it didn't feel like someone watching the house. It felt like someone watching over it. I walked back home after that and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I didn't even bother making coffee. I just sat there staring at the countertop, replaying the words in my head, watching over it, like it was a good thing, like it was protection, like it was a person standing guard. I didn't know if that idea was supposed to make me feel better. It didn't. It made me feel worse in a different way, because if something was watching over my house, that meant it thought there was a reason to. After that, I started staying up, which I know was probably the dumbest thing I could have done. If something in your life is already messing with your sleep, the last thing you should do is volunteer for more sleepless nights. But I couldn't stop myself. I wanted to see it. I wanted to catch it. I wanted to know if I was dealing with an electrical problem, a trespasser, or something I wasn't ready to name. The first 3 nights I tried, I failed. I sat in my living room with the lights off, the porch light switch in view, my phone in my hand, staring at the front window like it might blink first. I told myself I was going to stay awake, no matter what. But around 4 a.m., the quiet would get heavy, and my eyes would start closing without permission. I'd wake up later with a stiff neck, my cheek pressed to my shoulder, and that yellow porch light glow coming through the window like it had been there for hours, nothing else. No footsteps, no shadows, no proof, just the light. And the 4th night I made coffee, strong, bitter, the kind that makes your stomach feel tight. I kept the mug in both hands like it was a small heater, and I told myself I wasn't going to fall asleep this time. Hours passed. The street outside stayed empty. A couple cars went by in the distance, headlights sliding across the walls for a second, and then disappearing. The neighborhood dogs barked once, then went quiet again. The house creaked in the normal ways houses creak. Nothing happened until almost 3 a.m., and I was starting to feel stupid. I remember thinking maybe it stopped. Maybe it was just a weird stretch of bad wiring and it finally burned out. Maybe Dave's story made me paranoid and I'm turning it into something it isn't. I stood up to stretch, my back aching from sitting. It was automatic, not even a decision. And when I did, I looked toward the front window out of habit. That's when I saw them. Someone was standing at the edge of the porch. They weren't fully under the light. They were right where the yellow glow faded into the darker part of the yard. It made it hard to see details, and my brain kept trying to fill in what it couldn't confirm. At first I thought it might be a neighbor, maybe someone who got the wrong house, maybe someone checking their phone. But then I noticed how still they were. Not the normal stillness of someone waiting for a ride. Not the casual stillness of someone taking a breath. This was deliberate, like they were trying not to move at all. They had their back mostly toward me. It looked like they were facing down the street rather than looking at my house. Like they were paying attention to something far away. Something I couldn't see from my window. I stood there, frozen, and I don't know how long it lasted. Time did that weird thing it does when you're scared, where a few seconds feel stretched thin and endless. I didn't turn on the living room lights. I didn't unlock the door. I didn't open it. I didn't even call out. I just stood in the dark and watched. Eventually the figure moved. They didn't rush. They didn't flinch. They didn't look back. They just walked away at a normal pace, down the sidewalk, and kept going until they passed beyond the edge of my window and disappeared into the darkness between the streetlights. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the same chair until morning with my coffee gone cold, listening to the house and waiting for any sound that didn't belong. The next day, I called the non-emergency line. I told them someone had been on my porch late at night. I didn't mention the light turning on by itself. I didn't mention the video. I didn't mention Dave's story. I just reported the part that sounded normal enough to say out loud. An officer came out later. She looked around, checked the yard, the porch, the windows. She said she didn't see any signs of anyone trying to break in. No damage, no footprints she could point to. No obvious reason to think it was anything more than a person walking at night. She suggested it could have been a neighbor out late, or someone cutting through the street. Maybe someone who stopped for a second to tie a shoe or check their phone. She was kind about it, but I could tell she thought I was being a little paranoid. Maybe I was. But I filed the report anyway because I wanted it documented just in case. That was about 2.5 weeks ago. Now comes the part I've been avoiding writing, because it's the part that makes me feel like I've gone past creepy and into something I can't control. Last Tuesday I was awake late again, not even because I was trying to watch for anything. I just couldn't sleep. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I was in the living room with all the lights off, scrolling on my phone, letting the blue light burn my eyes because it was better than closing them and imagining someone outside. At some point, I looked up at the front window for no reason at all. Just one of those random, thoughtless glances. And I saw something at the far end of the street. I don't know what else to call it except something, because my brain refuses to settle on person. It was standing in a way that felt wrong, like the shape didn't match what it should have been. The proportions were off, or the posture was. I can't explain it in a clean way. It's more like my eyes understood it before my thoughts did. Like my body recognized that it wasn't looking at a normal human stance. It was too still. The same kind of stillness as the figure on my porch, but worse. Like a statue that had chosen that position and would hold it for as long as it needed to. And it was facing my house. I watched it for maybe 2 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe right. I just stared, trying to force my eyes to pick up details. Clothes, hair, a face, anything. But the distance and the darkness kept it vague, and the streetlights didn't help the way you'd think they would. They made hard, bright circles and hard black shadows, and the thing stood where the shadows were thick. Then my porch light flickered once. Just one quick blink, and whatever it was turned and walked away in the other direction, like it had been given a signal, like it had been told, not tonight. Like the light wasn't calling it closer, but pushing it back. It disappeared into the dark, swallowed by the quiet end of the street. After that, I didn't go outside. I didn't open the door. I didn't even step near the window again. I sat there until the sky started turning gray, and when the sun came up, I felt no relief. Only that heavy feeling you get when you realize something has become part of your life, and you don't know how to remove it. Since then, I haven't touched the porch light switch. I haven't turned it on or off. I haven't tested it. I haven't tried to prove anything. The light does what it wants, and I let it. That sounds crazy, but I'm being honest. After seeing that thing at the end of the street, after watching it leave right when the porch light flickered, I can't make myself interfere. I don't know what the figure on my porch is. I don't know if it's connected to the light, or if I'm just grabbing onto a pattern because I'm scared and running on no sleep. I don't know if Dave's neighbor had the right idea, or if she was just trying to make herself feel better by believing it meant protection. My sister keeps texting me, asking why I seem off. I keep telling her work is stressful, that nights have been rough, that I'm just tired. I don't know how to say, I think my porch light is doing something, and I think it's doing it for a reason. I don't know how to admit that I'm afraid of the dark in my own living room, but I keep thinking about what Dave said, watching over it. I don't know what's at the end of my street. I don't want to know. And as long as that light keeps coming on by itself, as long as it keeps flickering at the right moment, I think I'm going to leave it alone. Because the worst part is this: I'm not sure the light is the problem anymore. I'm starting to think it might be the only thing keeping whatever that is from coming closer. Story 5. I grew up only a few blocks from an old insane asylum. When I was a kid, it wasn't just some creepy place people whispered about online. It was part of the neighborhood, like a landmark you learned to live around. You'd pass it on the way to the store. You see the tops of the buildings from certain streets. On cloudy days, the place looked darker than everything around it, like the sky chose it on purpose. My parents used to tell me stories about it the way parents tell ghost stories when they want you to stay inside. They talked about patients wandering the grounds in thin white gowns, drifting between the trees and sidewalks like they belonged to a different time. The asylum wasn't deep in the woods or isolated out in the country. It sat right there near regular streets and houses, and for a long time the only thing separating it from the neighborhood was a chain link fence. Sometimes, my parents said, someone would climb that fence for a brief taste of freedom. They never gave me details like dates or names. It was always people said, and back then, and you never know what happened there. But the way they spoke, lower voice, quick glance toward the windows, made it feel real enough to take root in my imagination. Even as I got older, even after I learned how much adults love exaggerating stories, the place stayed lodged in my mind. There was something about it that didn't feel like a normal, abandoned building. It wasn't just empty. It felt removed, like it existed a few inches away from the rest of the world. Over the years, parts of the asylum were shut down. Some buildings went first, then whole wings, then entire sections. What was left looked less like a hospital and more like a dead industrial complex. The buildings were left to rot. Windows shattered, roofs caved in. Water stains ran down the walls in streaks that looked like old tears. Vines climbed up brick and concrete, thick enough in places to hide doorways. It's strange how quickly nature reclaims a place once people stop fighting for it. Give it a couple seasons without maintenance and the world starts pulling the structure back into the ground, one crack at a time. Weeds get bold, trees lean in, birds build nests where there used to be offices. For a long time, the asylum stayed in that half-alive state, parts still standing, parts collapsing, everyone in town aware of it, but nobody wanting to think too hard about what it used to be. Then word spread that the remaining buildings were going to be demolished. I heard it from a neighbor first. Then I saw it mentioned in a local group online. Someone had posted photos of a meeting notice, and the comments were full of people arguing. Some were excited because they thought the land would be turned into something nice. Others were angry because they thought it was history being erased. All I could think was that the chance was disappearing. I'd always had that urban explorer itch. I never called myself that out loud because it sounds more confident than I actually was, but I loved abandoned places. Not because I wanted to break laws or prove I was fearless. It was more like I wanted to see the leftover shape of people's lives. A school with desks still lined up, a factory with rusted machines, a hospital with signs still on the walls telling you where to go. Places like that feel honest in a way normal places don't. No one is performing. No one is pretending. Everything is just what it is now. The asylum was the biggest abandoned place near me, and I knew I had to get inside before it was gone. I found a friend willing to come with me. I won't use his real name, but he was the kind of guy who said sure before asking any follow-up questions. He'd grown up around here too, so he knew the stories. He joked about it, but I could tell there was some nervous energy underneath. We picked a date, mainly based on our schedules, but Also because we wanted it late enough that we wouldn't run into security, and early enough that the demolition crews wouldn't have started sealing things off. We agreed on a summer night. When the night came, it was brutal. The kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your back as soon as you step outside. The air didn't move. It felt thick, like breathing through a warm cloth. We were dropped off near the perimeter because neither of us wanted our car anywhere near the place. Too many people had gotten caught that way. Trespassing tickets, towing, awkward calls to parents, even when you're a full adult. We walked along the edge of the property until we found a spot where the fence sagged enough to slip through. Then we were in. The field between the neighborhood and the buildings was full of waist-high weeds. They brushed against our legs, damp and scratchy. Every few steps we hit something hidden, rocks, old trash, uneven ground. The weeds made it hard to see where we were placing our feet, and the darkness made it worse. In the distance, the empty buildings stood in silence. From far away, they didn't look real. They looked like flat shapes cut out against the night sky. The windows were black holes. The outlines of doorways looked too wide, too still. I expected the usual nighttime sounds. Wind, crickets, the distant hum of cars from the main road. Even if you're out somewhere quiet, there's almost always something. But it was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no insects, no traffic. Just the sound of our footsteps forcing through the weeds, the soft tearing of plants, and our own breathing. My friend whispered, "This is like a movie." And his voice sounded wrong in the open air, like it didn't belong. We reached the first building. Up close, it looked worse than it ever had from the street. The brick was stained. The lower windows had been boarded shut with plywood, most of it weathered and warped. Some boards were tagged with old paint. A few windows had bars. Even through the boards, you could see cracked glass behind them in places, like the building had taken multiple hits over the years, and just kept standing anyway. We circled slowly, staying close to the wall. We were looking for any opening, a door someone had pried open, a broken window low enough to climb through, anything. On the far side, we found it. One window had its plywood torn away, the nails bent outward like someone had ripped it free in a hurry. The frame was jagged. The remaining glass was cracked but pushed to the edges. It was just big enough. That was our way in. We looked at each other. Neither of us said anything. There wasn't a need. We both knew that if we talked too much, we'd start thinking too much. My friend climbed through first. He slid his legs in, then pulled the rest of his body after. I followed, careful not to cut myself on the broken glass. As soon as my feet hit the floor inside, my skin tightened. The air inside was freezing, not cool, not, "It's shaded in here," freezing. Like an air conditioner had been running full blast for years, like the building had its own weather system that ignored the summer night outside. The hairs on my arms stood up immediately. The sweat on my back turned cold and sticky. My friend exhaled and whispered, "What the hell?" His breath didn't fog, but the cold felt real enough that it should have. Our flashlights cut thin beams through dust. The first room we stood in looked like it had once been a pool room. The space was wide, with a deep rectangular pool in the center. The pool was empty except for shallow puddles of black, still water collecting at the bottom. The tiles around it were cracked. Debris had fallen in. Pieces of ceiling, chunks of plaster, leaves that had somehow made it through the broken windows. The water didn't move. No ripples at all, not even from our footsteps. It just sat there, flat and dark, reflecting our flashlight beams like oily mirrors. Broken glass crunched under our shoes as we moved. Every sound echoed, but it echoed oddly, like the building was too big inside for how it looked outside. The air smelled like mildew and old concrete, and underneath that, something faintly metallic. We found a doorway leading into a corridor. The hallways stretched farther than they should have, lined with room after room. It was the same view repeated. Door frames, darkness, chipped paint. Some rooms still had wire-frame beds. Some had rusted cabinets. Some had chairs knocked over like someone had stood up quickly and never sat down again. Everything had that abandoned feeling, but there was another layer, too. The rooms didn't look ransacked. They looked left behind, like people had meant to come back and never did. I kept thinking about the patients my parents had talked about. It's one thing to imagine an asylum from movies. It's another thing to stand in a hallway where real people had spent days, months, years, people who weren't allowed to leave. The quiet made it worse. Even our breathing sounded loud. We passed a room where the walls were scratched up around chest height, long, thin lines, some deep enough to leave grooves in the paint. My friend stopped and shined his flashlight along them. "Probably kids came in here and did that," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. He kept the light there a second too long, like he was hoping to see a normal explanation appear. We moved on and eventually came across what looked like an old reception desk. It was tipped slightly to one side. Behind it were shelves and drawers, many of them open. Papers were scattered everywhere, most of them rotted into soft clumps. The floor around the desk looked like it had been wet at some point, and then dried again, leaving warped stains. We started searching because that's what you do in places like this. You tell yourself you're looking for history, but really you're chasing the thrill of finding something that makes the place feel real. That's when we found the files, patient records. Stacks of them shoved into a cabinet that had somehow stayed mostly intact. The folders were faded, but the print was still readable. Names, photographs, notes, diagnoses, dates. Entire lives boxed up and forgotten. I flipped one open and saw a black and white photo stapled inside. The face was thin and pale, the eyes looking past the camera. Under it were typed lines describing behaviors in cold language, like the person was an object. My friend found another file and made a quiet sound, half laugh, half discomfort. "We should not be looking at these," he said. He was right. It felt wrong, like reading someone's diary after they died. We should have left then. Instead, we kept going. And that's what I hate admitting. We had a clear moment where our instincts told us to stop. We ignored it. We told ourselves we'd come all this way and we weren't going to leave after one room. We moved deeper into the building, following corridors that curved and connected in ways that didn't make sense. At one point, we passed a wall map that had been bolted near an intersection, but it was so faded and scratched that we couldn't tell what building we were in. The arrow that probably said, "You are here," was gone. The deeper we went, the more the building felt wrong. Not haunted in a dramatic way, more like disorienting. Doors that led into rooms too small for the hallway they were connected to. A staircase that went up but ended at a ceiling that had collapsed. A passage that seemed to loop back to somewhere we'd already been, even though we were sure we'd been walking in a straight line. Then we reached the end of one corridor and found a stairwell leading down into the basement. The air got even colder near the stairs. My friend shined his light down, and the beam disappeared into darkness. "We don't have to go down there," he said. "I know," I replied, and stepped onto the first stair anyway. We descended carefully, flashlights shaking with every step. The concrete was slick with moisture. Water dripped somewhere in the dark, slow and steady, like a faucet that would never be fixed. Each sound echoed and returned a second later, making it hard to tell where it started. But it wasn't a basement. At the bottom, we didn't find storage rooms or boilers or old supplies. We found a maintenance tunnel, a long concrete passage connecting the buildings underground. It looked like something built for function only. No paint, no decoration. Just bare concrete walls, thick pipes running along the ceiling, and occasional metal doors set into the sides. The air down there had a different smell. Damp concrete mixed with something old, like rust and standing water. The tunnel stretched farther than our flashlights could fully light. The darkness at the end looked solid, like a wall. My friend said, "This is how people disappear." I laughed quietly, more out of nerves than humor. We followed the tunnel. Our footsteps sounded heavier down there. The concrete amplified everything. The echo was strong enough that sometimes I'd hear a second set of steps layered with ours, slightly delayed. It made my shoulders tighten. I kept reminding myself it was just sound bouncing back, nothing more. Still, I kept glancing over my shoulder. We walked for what felt like forever until we found another staircase. This one led even deeper. It was narrower, the walls close enough that our shoulders almost brushed them. The steps were wet. The air was so cold it made my teeth hurt. Halfway down, my flashlight beam hit water. Not shallow puddles. Not dampness. Flooding. The water rose perfectly to the first stair like it had been measured. It didn't slosh or ripple. It didn't even move when we shifted our weight on the steps above it. It sat there, black and flat, swallowing the light. It looked intentional. Like someone had poured it in, or sealed off the drain, or designed it that way. Like someone wanted to block access without putting up a door. I stared at that water and felt my mind go oddly quiet. My thoughts slowed down, like the tunnel was pressing on them. My friend was beside me, and I could tell from his stillness he felt it too. We stood there longer than we should have, staring into it like we were waiting for it to do something. I don't know what I expected. A bubble, a movement, a hand reaching up. Something stupid from a horror movie. Nothing happened. And somehow that was worse. The longer I looked, the more I felt like the water wasn't just water. It felt like a boundary, like a line someone had drawn, and crossing it would mean stepping into something that wasn't meant for us. My friend swallowed loudly and said, "We need to go." His voice sounded distant in the tunnel, like it came from a different room. It took effort to move, like pulling your feet out of mud. We backed up the stairs, eyes still on the black surface until the angle hit it. We kept going down the maintenance tunnel, choosing the direction that led away from that flooded staircase. Neither of us said much. We just walked with our flashlights tight in our hands, trying not to let the dark close in. After another long stretch, we reached a stairwell that led up. We climbed it, and when we pushed through the door at the top, we entered another building. It was nearly identical to the first. Long halls, empty rooms, the same chipped paint, the same stale smell, the same quiet that didn't feel natural. For a moment, I wondered if we'd looped around and come back to where we started. But the layout wasn't exact. The damage was different. The graffiti tags were different. This was another building entirely, which meant those tunnels really did connect everything. A whole underground system, like veins. We started moving quickly now. The excitement had drained out of us. We didn't want more. We wanted out. We kept to the hallways, checking doorways as we passed, scanning for any sign that we could exit. At the end of one hallway, we spotted an open door leading outside. Moonlight spilled through it in a pale rectangle. Our exit. Relief hit so hard it almost made me dizzy. We hurried toward it, trying not to run because running on broken tile is how you end up in an ER explaining something you don't want to explain. As we got closer, my flashlight swept across the floor. Something dark stained the tile near the wall. At first it looked like an old spill. Then my brain registered the size and shape. A wide stain, thick, brown-red, dried into the tile. Not a splash, not a small patch, a long smear like something heavy had been dragged. It was too large to ignore, too old to understand. It didn't look fresh, but it didn't look like anything that belonged in an abandoned hospital either. My stomach turned hard, the same sick feeling I'd had in the security line of a different life, that instinctive warning from the body. My friend saw it too. He made a sound like he was about to speak, then stopped. That stain was enough for us. We pushed through the door and stepped outside into the heavy summer night. The warm air hit my face like a wave, and it felt wrong after the freezing cold inside. For a second, I just stood there, breathing, letting the heat prove I was back in the real world. Then we started moving. Fast. We crossed the field again, forcing our way through the weeds, not caring about scratches or tripping. The quiet was still there, but now it felt like it was watching us leave. We didn't stop until we were back near the fence, until we'd slipped out and reached the edge of the neighborhood where streetlights and parked cars made everything look normal again. Only then did we slow down. My friend kept looking back over his shoulder. In the car ride home, someone picked us up a few blocks away. He finally said what he'd been holding in. He swore that while we were in the tunnels, he could hear footsteps behind us. Slow, steady, not rushing, not random, matching our pace. I told him it was echoes. Concrete tunnels make weird sound. Our own steps were bouncing off the walls. The pipes overhead could carry vibration. It made perfect sense. He didn't argue, but his face didn't change. He still looked unsettled, like he'd heard something that didn't fit into a logical explanation. I still tell myself it was just echoes. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that flooded staircase, the water perfectly level, black and still, like a lid. And I think about how it felt standing there, staring into it like my mind was being pulled forward. I think about the silence in that place and the way the cold air felt alive. And I wonder what someone wanted buried beneath that water, badly enough to make sure nobody went down there again.